I'm going to start the meeting with a quote from one of my favorite church leaders, Chico Okazaki. She was in the General Relief Society presidency, and I love her perspective on a lot of things. So she said, "It is very likely that every person in the church knows someone, a family member or a friend, who is gay, lesbian, or bisexual. I also think it's very likely that many people do not know that they know a homosexual or bisexual person because that person is afraid to reveal that part of himself or herself for fear of being rejected, punished, or excluded. Nothing has suspended the commandment of Jesus to love one another and to bear one another's burdens." I don't think I'm going out very far on a limb to say that I know that you either have someone in your family with at least some of these problems, or you know somebody has some of these problems. This is what real families deal with in the real world, and they don't stop being families. A divorced family is not a broken family. It's a family with a particular set of circumstances that it needs to work with. A family with a gay child is not a failed family. It's a family with a member who needs special love and understanding, and who has love and understanding to give back. A family with a pregnant teenager is not a dysfunctional family. It's a family with a complex set of decisions to make. And I love that thought and how she just kind of normalizes it. Like, it's okay and it's normal, and we can all be here for each other as we walk through this interesting set of circumstances that we find ourselves in, right? So I guess we'll start with just panelists introducing ourselves. I'll start, and then Heidi, and then Jen, if you'll go after Heidi. My name is Shawna Jones. I've been attending Affirmation for about 5 years, and I was the secretary for a few years, and I'm now a board member. And our first Affirmation conference that we went to with our son when he was still a teenager was really life-changing for all of us. And so I've really wanted to continue to give back, because I know it can be a really lonely place, especially at first when your child comes out and you don't know where to turn or who to talk to about it. So my son Beckett came out at 13 to my husband and I as gay. And then when he was 18, he came out as transgender to our family, and he's 22 now. So we've been doing this for a little while, and we've gone through several labels along the way. So I've had a little bit of experience with quite a few different changes, but he's an amazing kid, and I'm really grateful that he's part of our family. Heidi.
Thank you. So my name is Heidi Ramirez. I'm from Orlando, Florida, and my gay son is who brought me on this journey. I thank God every day for that. We kind of knew for a long time. In fact, I remember sitting down with my husband when my son was about 2 years old, saying, what do we do if he's gay? And at that point, we decided we will love him and we will accept him for who he was born to be, and kind of tabled that conversation. And it wasn't until several years later, when he was 11 years old and he had had a breakdown. And so we're heading to the mental hospital, and he's asking us on the way, will I be in trouble if I'm gay? Will I be in trouble if I'm straight? Is it okay if I marry a guy? Is it okay if I marry a woman? And that was kind of, okay, here we go. And that conversation, he doesn't even remember having that conversation until about 3 years later, when he was officially ready to come out to us. And so that is my story, or my son's story. I guess it's both of ours. It's shared. He's invited me along the journey, I guess.
I feel old now. About almost 10 years ago, my oldest, I typed 8 in my description, and then I started doing the math, and it was actually 10. About 10 years ago, my oldest, when he was 16, told us he was gay, and it threw me particularly for a huge loop, because I was so uneducated, so underinformed, and so determined to get all of my little chickadees back to the celestial kingdom as a family, and I didn't know what to do with that. So that kind of started our journey. And then my youngest came out at 12 and has had several different variations of coming out across the years, and different labels that we've explored with. And I feel super grateful that I entered this world and met so many amazing people so that I would be prepared for that second round, of the journey that's been a little bit more creative and spontaneous than the first time with just the simple gay cisgender boy. So my first affirmation, I think, was 8 years ago. And at that point, there were 7 or 8 teens, and they were awesome. And I felt like we had found a lifeline that was going to help us figure out how to parent in these new circumstances. And then I got the opportunity to work with the youth for several years. And that is where it's at in affirmation. The youth are amazing. Even the most vulnerable who join at the start and are feeling kind of insecure and unsure of themselves, affirmation youth, that's where it's at.
Yes. Okay, Mike Palmer, you are sharing your screen. So if you could figure that out, that would be awesome. I'm not sure what happened, but Nika, will you share a little bit about yourself, please? There we go.
My apologies for getting here a little late. My middle child, Grayson, came out as transgender 11 years ago. And when he was 16, we joke he actually spent one day as a lesbian. But in that day, after I talked to him, I went down to my computer to do some research. And at the time, the LDS Church had nothing. But what I did find was Affirmation's website. And at the time, the website had a little menu bar at the top with various tabs. And I think in a moment of inspiration, instead of clicking the lesbian tab, I clicked transgender because I had seen some very masculine behaviors from my son. And I read that and all the light bulbs went off for me. And so the very next day, I had a conversation with Grayson and explained what it meant to be transgender, which he had never heard of, and asked him to pray about it. And he came back to me later that day with just glowing with his answer that he was God's son and it was going to be okay. And so with that foundation, he transitioned pretty quickly. Over 6 weeks. We went from calling him a typically feminine name and pronouns to calling him Grayson and he, and threw out pretty much all the clothes in his closet. We didn't throw them out, we donated them, and got him new thrift shop clothes to replace them that were more masculine. And he, just did a social transition start to finish in 6 weeks. And in that time, it was amazing to see the difference in his mental health. It truly was life-changing and life-saving for him to transition. Myself and my husband and my father all independently took Grayson aside in that period and said some variation of, you don't have to be Mormon. But my son very much wanted to stay engaged with the church. And we were fortunate to be in a ward that made that possible. And I'll share more about that later. At my first affirmation conference I attended was like 9 years ago. And as part of my ongoing tradition of doing things backwards, that's because Grayson and I spoke at that conference. And it was really a great opportunity for me. Affirmation has been there for me literally from day one. And I'm so grateful for the support that was there for me when I needed it. My son also identifies as ace. And so I don't know if there are parents here who have kids who are asexual, but that is also a thing. And affirmation can also support you in that.
Yes, thank you, Nika. Okay, questions. Do you have questions for us? We have kind of the range of spectrum of kids' identities and parenting experiences and church experiences. So feel free to ask any of your questions. I love, somebody put in the chat, you're not a failure as a parent if you have a child who is L, B, G, or T, but you're a failure if you kick your kid out or disown them. And they've always loved that quote. So, okay, questions. If you don't have any questions, we have a few, but we'll give you a chance to ask.
I have kind of a question. I'm interested in people's opinions, if that's an acceptable question. I believe that the church has not fully and completely embraced the LGBT community, not because God is opposed to the LGBT community, but because God understands people are not evolved enough yet to accept that. Does anyone else think that might be true? And that someday maybe we will become evolved enough and revelation will happen and the LGBT community will be fully accepted?
Nika?
I cannot speak for the church, and I, in fact, cannot speak for God. I can only speak for my own experience and that of my son, who has given me his permission to share his experiences. But my experience, as I have prayed for how to help Grayson, have very consistently been that I should help him transition and that I should support him. And I don't know long term how the church is going to move in terms of affirming LGBTQ people's identities. I know that as hard as my son tried to stay, now 11 years later, he is at a point in his church journey where I think he's glad his name is still on the records, but he has needed to step back from activity.
Jerry, you have your hand up.
I'd like to pipe in. Currently, I serve as the eldest quorum president in our Mandarin branch in Calgary. And I had a meeting with eldest quorum training meeting with my state president last Wednesday. Last Saturday, not this past Saturday, but a week ago Saturday, Elder Gary Stevenson was in Calgary doing leadership training with state presidents, temple presidents, and mission presidents in Western Canada and Western upper US. So what came out of that was his instruction from the first presidency, as with all the other 11 apostles, was to go out in the world and teach that the church is working towards understanding and outreaching to the LGBT community. So it's just beginning. So he's encouraged stake leaders to begin this messaging. And it's going to be as comfortable as each area is familiar and comfortable speaking about it. Well, what the takeaway is with the apostles sharing this message to them, then it is now safe for them to talk about in leadership meetings and at church. And I piped out in our meeting and came out to the other elders quorum presidents in my stake. I and my stake president are very tight. I can talk openly with him. I can book an appointment to speak to him directly versus going through the executive secretary. And recently, in October, he invited me to speak in state council, talking about LGBT inclusion, sensitivity training, and the things we need to improve on as people. And my takeaway from that was, it's ironic that as, and I'm just sort of generalizing, that all of you moms hopefully teach your kids to be kind. And that when adults turn 40 to 60, you have to reteach them to be kind once again. Because I've had that experience of having parents and friends who I thought were friends, not necessarily treat me as fairly or kindly as we've been taught. So I walked away from a couple friendships that I realized after 15 years was not healthy, that they were passively aggressive. And so that spearheaded my thought and my encouragement for us to be a kinder, more gentler, more patient people. And we honestly need to reteach members to be that, even though we have been taught as little children. So no, it's coming. It's I spoke to a few other people this week about this, and they heard rumblings about it. So it'll begin to surface to the general population, but it is just beginning right now. So that's some words of encouragement as far as that question. So
Thanks, Jerry. Jen or Heidi?
Yeah, I would like to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Nika said. When my son first came out, there was nothing. The church had no information. The only book that touched on the subject available was The Miracle of Forgiveness, which isn't like necessarily a parenting book. But shortly thereafter in a general conference, I don't know if any of you guys remember the talk from Elder Robbins. But basically the talk was, which way will you face? So you guys, nobody's nodding, but he was, the basic gist of what he was talking about was, will you face the world or will you face God? And I remember, wanting so desperately to be the kind of person who's always going to face God. And I realized that when it came to personal revelation for parenting, like holding stewardship over my own family, that sometimes I might have to choose not between God and the world, but I might have to choose between God and the church. And that was like a real epiphany for me. It was something I had never considered before. I had almost considered those words synonyms all the time, like God and the church were kind of the same thing in my mind. But as he was speaking, I was just overcome with emotion with the idea that sometimes when it comes to personal revelation, I was going to have to choose to face God, even if it meant that I was facing away from the church for a few moments. And I had to wrestle with that for a bit. It was really hard. But kind of like Nika said, like none of us can speak for the church. None of us can change the church. None of us know exactly what's going to happen. I used to try to predict, like within 10 years, within 5 years. And then I realized like, they're not on my same prediction schedule at all. They're doing their own thing, but like moment by moment and decision by decision in our family, we can choose to follow God as he directs our lives.
Yeah, I also, one of the things when my son first came out, I just think about just my life. I was born and raised in the church. I think of every single young woman lesson. I think of every single Relief Society lesson and church lesson. How many of those lessons did we learn about being a mother or preparing for motherhood and taking our little flock and preparing them to return back to the presence of our Heavenly Father and our Savior Jesus Christ? I never had one lesson about how to parent my LGBTQ child. And it was a shock to me. So I almost kind of went in overdrive. My therapist calls it OCD with religious scrupulosity. Thank you for that. But one of the scriptures that I first found when I was going through that process, and it just, I was at the temple probably several times a week and just constantly trying to get, what is the answer for me? What is the answer for my family? Heavenly Father, what do you want now? Where should we go? What should we do? And the one thing that really, I remember one day, just the articles of faith sticking out to me, that article of faith number 9 that says, we believe all that God has revealed, all that he does now reveal, and we believe that he will yet reveal many great and important things pertaining to the kingdom of God. And that really brought me peace, knowing that maybe, and I'm like one of those, I'm a control freak and I want the answers here and now. And that just kind of gave me pause that maybe we don't have the answers now. Maybe, and this is kind of like the evolution. I also did the same thing where I was a very, very strong believer in the Mormon LDS God. And I don't mean to say that like disrespectfully, but I had to kind of pivot and believe more in a rainbow, all-inclusive God. And then I was also at that same time able to kind of distinguish, make that separation between God and institutionalized religion. And so that kind of just realized that maybe we don't have the answers, and maybe our leaders haven't asked the right questions yet, or they haven't been ready for the answers they might receive. And so, yeah, I know that we can't speak on behalf of the church, but that's kind of been the process, that the answers that I've received for me and my family, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like when Beckett first came out, like that was a really a time when I really needed personal revelations, because like the other ladies have said, like there were not, resources that I could find. And so I was looking for resources and couldn't find anything. And so I really just had to turn to God. And the scripture that really came to me was when Nephi says, I don't know the meaning of all things, but I know that God loveth his children. And I knew I loved my child, and I knew that he deserved love and support. And also I knew when I was giving him the support that he needed, he became less suicidal, and he became happier, and he became more content in his own body, and those things. And so it was one of those things where I really had to develop my personal relationship with God. And sometimes the guidance that was given by the general guidance, right, that the church gives was not appropriate for my situation. I think that was an important thing that I learned during that time. Julia.
Thank you. I didn't mean to imply that I was trying to speak for Heavenly Father or for the church. I just was saying that from my own personal experience with God through prayer, I don't believe God rejects us for any reason, but certainly not for an orientation or a gender or we were born with. And also, I'm very new to the church. I was only baptized last July, and I come to a church from a Jewish background, and so it was a little bit shocking to find out that in the Jewish background from which I come from, there are LGBT rabbis. They do gay and lesbian marriages. There are transgender rabbis. It's just kind of a non-issue, and so it was a little bit shocking to realize that our church isn't quite there yet. But I have great hope and faith that we will be. But I'm not trying to speak for the church or for God.
No, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Elaine?
Yes, it is me. So I have a son who is gay and came out when he was 17, and now this last year and a half, and another son came out as transgender. And so I have a gay son and a daughter now. And in the beginning, when I knew about my son, I had a my church believes shake a little bit, but I continue going to the church and continue doing my my calls and everything, but everything was like the enchantment was broke, like something that was sparkly perfect in my life with a big beautiful family with my kids and everything was crack. And hearing about them and their experience at church, I because I didn't know yet, so they went to seminary, so they wake up like 6 in the morning every day and all this kind of things, and they talked to me later about things that were teaching at church and everything, and I felt that was made some damage to them. This is what I felt, because they said, "Oh, Mom, it was awful that day that my bishop said that was not right to have feelings for another person of the same sex, and I felt that what is wrong? I want to have the same thing that you guys have, that you and Dad has, like a family. I want to find somebody that loves me, and etc." And with my daughter, I just felt like I don't belong anymore. You know, I feel that I don't belong anymore. I hear things at church that I believe it, yes, like before. And sister telling things that I will say exactly the same things. And for me now, I feel like I don't belong. I feel that I'm a little bit hypocrite, because I don't believe in that anymore. And every time that I go to church now, I came back feeling worse than if I didn't go. You know, I feel that, what he's talking about, he doesn't know. And few people at church knows about our family, so I feel that it is another thing that, how are you doing? How is your family? Oh, it's fine. You're okay. We're doing, but you already told a lot of things that you went through, that I went through too, like suicidal, going to hospitals because my daughter wants to kill herself, all of these things. And this is what I feel, and this is my question. My question is, how you guys feel about church? How you were going to church? How you I don't know. I don't have a good question to ask, but I think you can understand what I want to know about you. How you go to your life. I know that my family, and one thing that I feel about, because everything, put God in first, but I just say, but this is like Heidi said, that I was thinking that if I put God first, what they are talking at church is that this is not that I need to keep my daughter as a boy, and will be his suicidal journey. I will not keep this. So this is the kind of thing that I cannot do this. I need to put God, but yes, I need to find, like you said, I need to find another God that is more inclusive. But this is the thing. This is the thing. I feel that I cannot be at church in this moment. It's hurting me every time. It's hurting me.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on this one to start. Several years ago, Carolyn Pearson came and spoke at an affirmation conference in California, and her words have stuck with me ever since. And she talked about how many times the scriptures talk about God's people or the people of earth in terms of like a garden or a vineyard. And like Carolyn said, I absolutely know that people can feel the warmth and the light of God in the Mormon vineyard corner, because that's where I met God. That's where I learned how to communicate and develop a relationship with the divine. But for some people, and we see it in the scriptures time and time again, right? It's time for people to be pulled from where they're at and replanted somewhere else in the garden where they can feel the love and the warmth and the support of God, even if for a long time they don't use the terminology of God, but the warmth and love of self-worth and personal value. For myself, I reached a point very much like you're talking about. Every Sunday for me to go to church was amazingly painful. All day Saturday, I had anxiety because I knew church was coming the next day. Then I went to church, I was very strong and stalwart, and then I came home and I cried the rest of the day, and then I recovered all day Monday, and I had a couple good days before it started again. And I found myself becoming bitter and resentful and angry at church. I wasn't finding God there for me when I went anymore, because my children had experienced religious trauma, and religious trauma is very real inside every religion, including Mormonism. So for our family, we had to leave the church and find a different place in the vineyard to grow, where we could feel that warmth of and value and have a relationship with God that we couldn't find anymore inside the Mormon church. And I'm absolutely not telling anyone else what they should do. But I don't believe that God only speaks to people in Mormonism, but I do believe he does. That's, like I said, that's where I met him. But when I could no longer communicate with him there, we had to relocate ourselves.
I had a very similar experience that I was taking anti-anxiety meds, Xanax, every Sunday just to make it through church, because it was so difficult for me to go and listen. And if I did want to contribute, it was stressful for me to do that. It was really hard, and I wanted to be there. I wanted to be there, and it was painful to be there. And so, not to minimize that struggle of really wanting to be at church, but also not finding the peace and love of God at church like you used to. I just want to witness that struggle is real, and everybody has to make a personal decision on what that means for them. Something that was really helpful to me is another mom of an LGBTQ kid said, it's okay to take a break. It doesn't mean you're leaving church, but if it's hurting you, it's okay to take a step back and take care of yourself for a little while, and to reevaluate how you're being served, by church, and whether that's a good thing for you. So, Nika.
One of the ways I have thought about it is the prophet Jeremiah and the prophet Lehi lived in the same place, Jerusalem, at the same time. And the Lord spoke to Jeremiah and said, stay here and witness the destruction of my people. And what he told Lehi was, I need you to take your family and leave. And I believe that Jeremiah was a prophet, and I believe that Lehi was a prophet, and the Lord told him to do different things. So I am active in my ward. And I acknowledge realistically that as much as I would like to think, oh, it's because I'm super stalwart, part of it is that my ward has been a place safe enough for me to stay. The talks in sacrament meeting in my ward are very focused on Christ. And every Sunday school discussion does not turn into a let's bash gay people lesson. And because of those things, it was easier for my Grayson to stay active, and it's been easier for me to stay active. And I'm so grateful for the people in my ward who've made that happen. And I know that's not everyone's situation. And I think we need to go where we're led.
That going where you're led, that really resonates with me. First, I just want to say, I hold space for all of you. This journey is so unique. It's individual. Every journey, every family's journey is different. I wish there were like a one size fits all model. Wouldn't that be so much easier? I tried and tried and tried to stay for so long. I wanted to be that change maker from within and be the voice for the marginalized. It got to the point where I wasn't putting physical boxing gloves on, but I was ready just to punch people in the face every single Sunday. In the beginning of my journey, it was the anxiety, and I would get just major anxiety attacks Saturday, Sunday. I would cry the minute I woke up Sunday morning, cry until I went to church. I would cry the entire 3-hour block. Everyone's like, what is wrong with her? And then I would get home and I would cry the rest of the afternoon, evening. And then it would take like Monday and Tuesday anyway to recover. And then that sadness and that despair kind of converted into more of like an anger and on the defense, and how dare you attack my family that way, and how dare you say that, you know, my gay son is destroying families or what have you. And so I literally felt like I was like pulling out the boxing gloves every Sunday, just ready for that next attack. And it did get to the point where it was affecting my health. It was affecting me spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally. And I did put myself on church timeout or sabbatical last summer with full intentions to return. I thought I was just going to put myself just on a little timeout until I could just cool down and regroup a little bit. And then I found our Restoration Cousins, Community of Christ. I was not looking for another church or another religion. that was not part of my plan. But I guess God had other plans for me. Once again, Carolyn Pearson, one of the poems that I found as I was going through this process was her poem about pioneers. My people were Mormon pioneers. Is the blood still good? They stood in awe as truth flew by like a dove and dropped a feather in the west. Where truth flies, you follow, if you are a pioneer. I have searched the skies, and now and then another feather has fallen. I have packed the handcart again, packed it with the precious things, and thrown away the rest. I will sing by the fires at night, out there on uncharted ground, where I am my own captain of tens, where I blow the bugle, bring myself to morning prayer, map out the miles, and never know when or where, or if at all, I will finally say, this is the place. I face the plains on a good day for walking. The sun rises and the mist clears. I will be all right. My people were Mormon pioneers. And so I've kind of embraced my DNA, my pioneer ancestry, in search for what is going to, I think of my ancestors who left their countries, who left everything they had to come to the United States in search of religion, in search of their truth. They sacrificed all for it until they eventually ended up in Utah. And I feel that right now my call is to go elsewhere. And it's been a very peaceful journey. I'm no longer fighting myself and having all the anxiety. And so it's been a difficult road for me, because in the church it's kind of like that either or binary thinking. There's right and there's wrong, and there's good and there's bad. And it's been a shift for me to realize that we can have both, and in other words, that we can have differentiation, and then I can have my values and I can have my beliefs, and my family can receive answers to their prayers. But at the same time, my parents and my other relatives and my friends that I've grown up with in the church, they can also have their values. They can also have their beliefs. They can also choose their path that works best for them. And so that's kind of my journey.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Sending love. It's really hard. Other questions? Maybe we can talk about what the path of our children has looked like, so that I know that was one of the things that when Beckett first came out, I had all these plans of what he was going to do, you know, the mission and the temple marriage and the babies and the that kind of thing. And so when he came out as gay, that kind of rocked all of my plans, my parenting plans for his life, you know, as we parents sometimes do. And it was actually, so I'm going to back up a little bit. I have another son who is a childhood cancer survivor. He had cancer when he was 2, and he did a year of chemotherapy and radiation, and he's doing well today. But during that time, from 2 to 3, I spent a lot of time like not knowing what his future would look like, or if we would have a future with him, right? Like, I didn't know if he would turn 8 and get baptized. I didn't know if he would turn 18 and go on a mission. Like, and so that experience taught me to be really grateful for whatever piece of his life we were given, whatever path of his life we had. We would be really grateful, because his prognosis was not great. So when Beckett came out, I had sort of a similar feeling, like, oh my gosh, now what? Like, what is his future going to look like? And I kind of went back to that experience with my kid with cancer. Like, I don't know what his life is going to look like, but just because life doesn't look like what we thought it would, doesn't mean it can't be beautiful. And that is something that I have learned a few times over in my parenting journey, and has been really important for me to believe my child, to, you know, affirm him. When he came out, he was very suicidal. He spent some time in the hospital, and but when we showed him love and acceptance, like, he was not even old enough to date yet. He didn't want to date. He was just freaking out that he knew he was different. And so we just gave him love and said, whatever your path looks like, we're going to be there with you, and it's going to be okay. And our kids kind of have to make their own paths, right? Because the church's path is for straight cisgender kids. It's not really it's not really built for our kids. And so, again, personal revelation and trusting, that our kids can make good decisions and helping them make good decisions. So for Beckett, he continued to go to church until he was going to seminary up until his senior year. And then he was having panic attacks in the car on the way to seminary. I pulled him out because of the suicide attempt, and I was just taking him to seminary because seminary was so great for me, and I loved it, and I thought that would be so helpful for him during this time of, mental distress. It was not. I would sometimes push him out of the car, and he would go in and just sit in the bathroom and cry, and the secretary would call me and be like, "Your kid is crying." Anyway, finally, we pulled him from seminary, and he had to stop going to church, and he stopped going to church. And I thought, so now what? Like, I don't know what comes now. But he's okay. Like, when he came out as transgender, it was before the church had kind of made a lot of rules about trans kids yet. And so I didn't really feel that struggle as much, but he transitioned, and he's doing great. Like, his mental health is really good, and he is in a week he's going to fly to the middle of the Pacific to spend the summer working on some remote atoll in the Pacific Ocean, doing conservation work. He's doing really well. And so I just want to say, like, we've had ups and downs, and it's been hard. And for Beckett, the church was not a safe place for him. I really wanted it to be, and it wasn't. And if he had felt safe there, I would have encouraged that. But I knew he was not safe there. And so he is not in the church, but he is an amazing, kind kid, and he's doing really well. He's 22, he'll turn 23 in a few months, and he's really doing well. So I just want to say, like, it can get better. It's going to get different probably, but it can get better. So Jen or Nika or Heidi.
I think what you had to say about, the kind of there's this standard path for our LDS kids and, what they're supposed to do. When my Grayson was in his freshman year of college, literally every single one of his high school friends was on a mission. And Grayson couldn't go. There's no space in a mission in the church's missionary program for a transgender missionary. And he really struggled with that for a while. But during that same period, Grayson and I were working with Equality Utah to get housing and employment non-discrimination protections extended to LGBTQ people in Utah. And he and I had the opportunity to make a video for Equality Utah as part of that process, and had the opportunity to testify before the state legislature as part of that process. And that YouTube video is still up, and there's been over 50,000 views. And he and I talked about it one time, and that there are literally thousands of people who would never let the missionaries in the door, but who had a chance to listen to Grayson because of that video. And one person told us that they shared that video with their mother, who they were estranged from, and then had the first good conversation with their mom that they'd had in 10 years. And so I think Grayson and I both came to the conclusion that God had called him to a different mission. But he still had great and important work to do.
One of the things I was thinking about while Shawna was speaking was the idea of like that future path. That's still one of my very favorite things about the church. It works for so many people. It absolutely worked for me. I fit into that little box just beautifully, and it made my life so full of joy and so happy. It was such a great way for me to grow up. And when that path no longer was an option for my children now, I felt really lost and confused. And in my panic-filled prayers at the start, I would say to God, like, will he even get married? I don't even know if he'll get married. I don't even know if he'll have kids. What will his future look like? That how we, kind of spin out sometimes, or at least I do. And this calming peace came over me at the time that said, you never really knew. You never really knew. And I had to remind myself that there was this path that we had been shown, but I never knew if my kid was going to get married, if he was going to find the love of his life. I never knew if my kid was going to have children, or if there were going to be infertility problems. I didn't even know really if he was going to survive past the age of 20. It was all this illusion that I had created in my head of what the perfect future would look like in my dream world. And having the Spirit whisper to my heart, like, you never knew any of that, was kind of humbling at the time. I was like, wow, that really was an arrogant way that I was speaking, where I felt like I was in control of the universe and I was in control of this person's destiny. And if I parented hard enough and perfect enough and had the right family home evenings and scripture study, that I could just guide him down this perfect path home. And to be told by the Spirit, like, oh, you were never in charge of any of that, was a hard lesson for me that I still chew on a lot. But it's also actually similarly at a different time, I was, trying to get God to tell me the answers to the universe when it came to all things transgender and homosexuality. Kind of like Heidi was talking about, that cookie cutter answer, like, well, what is the one answer then for all of the people, kind of idea. And my prayers during this whole time were incredibly intense. And God absolutely walked with me every second of the way, because I was so alone. And just this feeling of like, why do you think you know what this kid should do? Like, why can you not trust me to guide him home? Why can you not trust me to have the communication that he needs to guide him on his path? Like, what makes you think that you love him more than I do, or that you know better for this kid than I do? And realizing, like, man, I gotta step back a little bit and stop trying to control my kids' spiritual life and their earthly life. That's not my job. My job is to maintain relationship with my child and support them and love them and guide them, teach them how to find answers for themselves, teach them how to communicate with a valid source of information for themselves. And that kind of changed everything for me. He was the same. He was doing great. And kind of like along Shawna's lines, I don't worry about it anymore. Like, my kids are doing great. My oldest is 26 and he graduated from college super young and is just doing his thing and pursuing his hobbies and hanging out and has a job like any other kid who's 26 that's figuring it out in this crazy world.
Yeah, my son, so he came out when we were living in Utah. We lived in Utah for a couple of years. And I truly believe that the reason we were meant to go to Utah was so that I could figure out how to navigate this intersectionality between being an ally and then also being a member of the church, or now I guess being LDS adjacent. I still consider myself culturally Mormon. That's part of my DNA. It's part of my heritage. It's who I am. He kind of, in the beginning, my husband was very, very adamant that we have the same rules for all children. And so that everyone goes to church until they're 18. Then when they're an adult, they can make their mind, what have you. My son was not ready to come out to people at church because he did not trust them and he did not have a relationship with them. He was outed by the young men's president's son. And it was very, very messy and very, very awkward and just very, very, not a good experience. They didn't know what to do with my son. Like, what do you do with the gay kid? And so my husband was called to be the advisor over my son. Basically, he was my son's babysitter. My son and my husband would go to church, go to the midweek activities, go to the Sunday meetings. Nobody would talk to them. Nobody would say hi. And then it got to a point where my son wasn't even going anymore. And so then my husband was like, I don't even need to be in this calling anymore because my job was to kind of hang out with the gay kid. We finally, his mental health was deteriorating. He had suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation for a little over a year. And it became a point, kind of like Shawna had mentioned, where church was not a safe space for him. And talk about having plans. I was like, I'm the planner of the world. I have plans for me and for everybody else. I'm learning to relinquish some of that control and that power. But I went from like, you will go to church and you will go to midweek activities and you will do this until you're 18 to you are not allowed to go to any church meetings because it's not safe for you. My son right now is on the wedding and funeral plan. He goes to weddings, he goes to funerals at LDS churches, and that's about it. hasn't had a chance to go to any baby blessings or baptisms. I think we got him out before it was too late. For a lot of our LGBTQ youth, they turn very very, very angry at God, and to the point where they're no longer even a believer. My son is still very, very, his name is Mateo. Mateo means gift from God. He has always been, out of my 3 children, the most naturally just Christ-like, giving, he's just like such a beautiful human, always looking out for others. He is very, very in tune with a higher power. And so even though he's not going to church, he's in a good space right now. He's in a very, very good space. He comes out and sits with me on the couch every week and listens as I'm on the Zoom meetings with Community of Christ. The pastor of the Toronto congregation is former LDS, and he is gay. And so he'll sit on the couch and listen in with me and ask questions. He's even helping right now. Community of Christ has a podcast called Project Zion. He's helping with community service hours, listening to the podcast and helping get those transcribed. And so he's in a good space right now. And 4 years ago, I did not see this day coming, because I did not know if we would survive from one day to the next. Is that kind of, I facilitate QPR, suicide prevention courses, and it is near and dear to my heart just because of where my son was at that point in his journey. And I feel that those classes are so important. So I know that's kind of like another topic, whatever, but yeah, my son, he is a wonderful human being. I have 0 complaints. I always just thought that, like, oh, you leave the church and you're all of a sudden going to turn into a bad person. No, all of the values that he was raised with, and those, I'll give you even an example. Like about a month ago, it was a Sunday, and he wanted ice cream. He wanted to go to the local ice cream shop and get an ice cream cone. And he's like, Mom, I really, really want ice cream today. Do you think we could go? And I was like, yeah, if you want ice cream, go ahead and go. He's like, but are we, is it allowed? Are we okay? Is it? So he's still living with that, like, keep the Sabbath day holy. And then he's like, oh my gosh, Mom, I can't believe that. Like, I guess I can go, but it just never occurred to me that I can go shopping on a Sunday and I can go to the ice cream place. And so even the things that he had learned growing up, it's still kind of part of who he is, even though he's stepped away from the church.
Barry.
Okay, I'm gonna pipe in with a good story. This happened 6 weeks ago. Another bishop from another ward in my stake had reached out to me. He has a young man who's 17, who he's been meeting with for a number of weeks. They have a very open conversation. This young man is gay. Unfortunately, this young man and his parents have not had a comfortable conversation, so they just don't talk about it at all. So he's reached out to his bishop, and his bishop reached out to me. His bishop is relatively new. He's only been bishop for maybe 3 months, and had heard that I had done bishop's training in our stake about LGBTQ inclusion and sensitivity training. So I did one-on-one training or conversation with the bishop one night, and then told him about the essays and articles that I've been writing about coming out, safe spaces at church, marriage equality, my journey being an advocate within the church, and talking about both the positive and negative experiences I've had, friends have had, and my American friends have had. So he shared that with this young man, and he's still in conversation. He's still deciding whether to remain active in church or to walk away. But the bishop also sent these articles to his parents. And then I got a phone call a couple weeks ago saying that the parents now feel more comfortable, and this young man feels more comfortable speaking openly about how he feels as being gay and recognizing who he is, and from what he's read. And I say this humbly, visibility is so important, to be able to see someone who's who's transparent and visible. Like, not everyone can do that. I'm a rare case. The fact that I'm older, I'll humor all of you. I turned 60 this year and I'm still coming out 40 years later. I came out last week to a couple of new friends who had asked me if I'd been married. And I did tell the truth, I wasn't married. And then, and this couple was actually from my templeship. I serve in the Calgary Temple. And they asked, before asking me if I was married, they asked, is Sister Chong serving in the temple? And I said, honest answer, no, she isn't, because there's no Sister Chong. Is she on her way? No, she isn't. And then they asked, are you married? It's like, no. But I think in a couple of weeks, I'll be comfortable to open up to them, to who I really am. And that's how it's been. Again, I have grown to know who to come out to and when someone's ready. And that's what I encourage you and your kids. It's not a race to come out. You've got the rest of your life to come out to those that you feel safe, who you feel supported by, and who will be there for you and for your kids. I've had, again, I've been very fortunate for the last 40 years. I've always had a positive experience, but I've taken my time to think about it, to contemplate it, and to know that when I call you my friend, I really mean it. So as a result, this young man and his parents are beginning to be able to talk openly. And I know that it's going to be hard for them for a while, but the conversations are beginning. The same bishop reached out to me a couple of weeks after this first conversation with this young man, and there's a 30-year-old man, also a young man, who had stepped away from church 10 years ago, who identifies as gay, as queer, is questioning whether to come back to church, and wanted to meet me and talk about the things that I've been doing, how I've been feeling, and how I've navigated and sorted my life being an active member of the church. So I told him about we are fortunate where we are, that we have a stake president and leadership that is open to these conversations, that it's safe to talk about it. And that the best question my stake president had asked me is, do you like being in the stake? I said, yes. Do you feel safe in the stake? I said, yes. Has anyone said or done anything to hurt you? And it was discreet. I said, I've had some experiences where I didn't feel that I belonged, that I could have walked away tomorrow. But knowing that that percentage is very small, and the love that I have from my friends at church and my friends outside of the church, that's what's kept me grounded. And it's your kids who are that are 12 and 14 that are searching to find a place. So that's what keeps me motivated in the work that I do. And I talk about that when I was 14, I was very clumsy and awkward. And this was in 1975. When we didn't talk about this at all. And amongst my friends, no one knew until I was 19. But to find that self-confidence, that self-esteem, that's a lifetime journey. And to have parents that love them, and friends and what we call our tribe, both in the church and outside of the church, that's what keeps you strong. That's what keeps you grounded. And that's what keeps you here. So I just thought I'd share that with you.
Thanks, Jerry. Okay, we've been here an hour, so we will let you go. Thank you for spending some time with us. Thanks, Jen and Heidi and Nika, for being willing to come and field questions. We appreciate all of you, and if you need additional help, you can reach out through affirmation.org, and Joel can connect you with me if you want to talk further. So we love you guys, and we see you, and have a good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.